In a small, forgotten town, at the end of a narrow, overgrown path, stood a crumbling mansion. Once a symbol of wealth and power, the grand structure now loomed like a ghost over the landscape, its broken windows like empty eyes staring into the darkness. The locals whispered tales of the mansion's cursed history. They spoke of the last family that lived, the wealthy couple with a young daughter, who vanished without a trace one stormy night. Since then, no one dared to enter, and the mansion was left to rot. One foggy evening, a group of teenagers decided to test their courage. Armed with flashlights and bravado, they made their way to the mansion, ignoring the warnings of the elders. The heavy iron gates creaked open with an eerie groan, and they stepped onto the weed-choked driveway. The air inside the mansion was thick with decay. Dust swirled in the dim light as they moved cautiously through the rooms, each step echoing off the cold, stone walls. Strange shadows danced just beyond the reach of their flashlights, and every now and then, a soft whisper seemed to float through the air. In the grand hallway, they found an old portrait hanging crooked on the wall. It depicted a young girl with haunting eyes that seemed to follow them as they moved. The feeling of being watched grew stronger with each passing moment. Suddenly, one of them heard a faint sound, a distant melody, like a music box playing in a far-off room. The group followed the sound, their nerves fraying with every step. The melody led them to a small, hidden room at the back of the mansion. Inside, they found an old, dusty music box sitting on a table. It was open and slowly turning, but the key had not been wound. As they approached, the music abruptly stopped, and the door behind them slammed shut. Panic set in as they realized they were trapped. The shadows in the room seemed to grow darker, closing in around them. Then, they saw her, the ghostly figure of the young girl from the portrait. Her pale face and hollow eyes stared at them with a mix of sadness and anger. She whispered in a voice that chilled their bones, "You shouldn't have come here." The lights flickered, and in an instant, the room was plunged into darkness. The last thing they heard was the sound of the music box starting up again, playing its haunting tune as the air around them grew colder and colder. The room seemed to close in on them as the temperature plummeted. Their breaths became visible, puffing out in shaky clouds. Fear gripped them tightly, but there was no escape. The walls, once solid and cold, now seemed to pulse with a life of their own. "Who are you?" one of the boys stammered, his voice trembling. The ghostly girl tilted her head slightly, her hollow eyes locked onto him. "I was forgotten," she whispered, "but I never left." As she spoke, the shadows in the room began to move, twisting and coiling like smoke. The darkness felt alive, creeping closer to the group as if it had a will of its own. The girl reached out a translucent hand, pointing to the music box. "You found it," she said, her voice distant, echoing. "Now you must hear my story." The music box began to play once more, but this time, it wasn't just a melody. The notes were accompanied by whispers, indistinct at first, but growing louder, forming words. The teenagers listened in horror as the whispers revealed the tragic tale of the mansion's last residents. The young girl had been lonely, neglected by her wealthy parents, who were more interested in their social standing than in their daughter. She had spent most of her days alone, wandering the vast halls of the mansion. Her only companion a small, ornate music box that played her favorite lullaby. One night, during a terrible storm, the girl's loneliness turned to despair. In her grief, she had made a wish to never be alone again. But wishes made in desperation often come with a price. The storm raged, and as lightning struck the mansion, the girl vanished, her presence bound to the music box forever. Her parents, searching frantically for her, had succumbed to the darkness that now engulfed the house, their souls trapped within its walls. "You must help me," the ghostly girl pleaded, her voice trembling with desperation. "Free me from this curse. Take the music box and destroy it." The group exchanged terrified glances. They didn't know what to believe, but they could feel the weight of her words pressing down on them. The air was thick with tension, and the shadows seemed to be closing in tighter, as if urging them to make a decision. One of the girls, trembling but determined, stepped forward and grabbed the music box. The moment she touched it, the whispers grew louder, angrier, swirling around her like a storm. She could feel the presence of the girl, her sorrow and rage, as if it was seeping into her soul. "You must do it now," the ghost cried, her form flickering, becoming more distorted as the darkness encroached further. "Destroy it before it's too late." But the house seemed to have other plans. The walls began to shake, the floorboards groaning, as if something deep within the mansion was awakening. The darkness was no longer just shadows, it was a living, breathing entity, hungering for them, desperate to keep them trapped inside. With a final, desperate glance at her friends, the girl holding the music box ran for the door, which had mysteriously opened once more. The others followed, the darkness snapping at their heels as they raced through the mansion. The whispers grew into a cacophony of voices, urging them to stop, to turn back, but they kept running, fueled by sheer terror. Finally, they burst out of the mansion and into the cold night air. The oppressive atmosphere of the house was gone, replaced by the eerie silence of the foggy night. The music box was still in the girl's hands, and she looked down at it, feeling its weight. Without a second thought, she hurled it to the ground, smashing it into pieces. As the music box shattered, a scream echoed from the mansion, long and piercing, before fading into nothingness. The fog seemed to lift, revealing the mansion now dark and silent, as if it had finally gone to sleep. The ghostly presence was gone, and the teenagers stood in stunned silence, unsure if they had truly freed the girl or unleashed something far worse. The next morning, the mansion stood as it always had, silent and abandoned. But the locals noticed a change. The air around the mansion seemed lighter, and the oppressive feeling that had hung over it for decades had vanished. But no one dared to approach it, for fear that the curse wasn't truly broken. And in the back of their minds, they all wondered, had the girl's spirit been freed, or had she simply found new guardians to take her place in the mansion's dark embrace?